Welcome to tutorial number 2 of this course. In this tutorial, I'll discuss the differences between genres and how each one has a distinct take on the groove front. Knowing the conventions of the genre you're working in is the key to making your song sound like what you're aiming for it to sound like, and having these default short grooves can give you a basic beat you can always fall back to. Of course, fills and fancy licks are an exciting part of the whole thing, and we'll get to that later, but these grooves are the foundation and one of the most important building blocks for your drum part. I won't cover all the genres in the world, for obvious reasons. I'll just pick a few that are popular enough and different enough from one another so I can get my point across. Oh, and I want to mention one thing. The characteristics that I'm going to discuss for each genre are very much a generalization. It goes without saying that there's way more nuance for each of these styles than what I'm going to present. These general aesthetics are a very stripped down and basic way to view these. So I'm going to be talking in a very broad manner. For the purpose of this tutorial, let's look at these genres: rock and pop, traditional jazz, and R&B and hip-hop. Each one of these, and any other genre for that purpose, has a sound, a feel, that has to do a lot with the groove that you expect to hear from said genre. These grooves got cemented into these styles after years and years of consistent use by many artists who largely abide by these aesthetic paradigms. So here's a very basic rock/pop groove. Back in Black by AC/DC or Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears are good examples for this. The elements I identify as stylistically important here are the kick drum on beat 1, the snare on the backbeat, beats 2 and 4 or beat 3 if we're in halftime, and yes, we're most likely going to be in a 4/4 time signature, and the steadiness and predictability of the groove, as both genres originally tilted towards music for dancing. In both genres, the drums would be pretty dominant in the mix, and their dynamic impact is very heavy and upfront. The general difference between these genres will stem from sound and variability within the song. Rock grooves tend to be played on acoustic drum sets, and more often than not, the groove would change within the song. The sound would be very raw, so very punchy kick drums and very powerful snare hits. In pop, this groove might be generated from some electronic sample or a drum loop. The soundscapes in pop have a larger variety, especially the kick and the snare, and the groove might be consistent the whole song. In the jazz world, the groove is very different. The stereotypical swing groove is notated like this in most drum books, sometimes even as heavy as this. New York by Frank Sinatra is a very good example. This is a pretty bad representation of this groove, as in my opinion it leads to a skewed understanding of this genre, but that's a different discussion. Here's a more modern version of the stereotypical swing groove in a jazz context. The elements I identify as stylistically important here are the driving quarter note pulse on the right cymbal, the 2 and 4 accents on the hi-hat, the triplet feel, and the loose and non-committed kick and snare drum patterns. Usually the drums in this genre would be tuned on the high side. The cymbals, the ride and the hi-hat specifically, would be very dominant in the mix, and the general feel is light and bouncy. The bass, usually an upright bass, would play a steady quarter note pulse that would be the main heavy lifter on the groove side for this genre. The ride cymbal doubles this pattern. The kick and snare drums have a bit more freedom, as they're usually used for reacting to the music played on the spot. When this style of music just started, the kick used to join the bass on that quarter note pattern, but that's not really relevant anymore in the modern jazz era. Anyway, this looseness adds a lot of lightness to this groove, as you don't have a rigid, heavy kick and snare pattern going on, and there's a lighter overall feel that comes as a result of that. In R&B or hip-hop, the main role of the groove is to be steady and to support the vocalist or the rapper. The content of the groove varies a lot. Here are a few examples. Still DRE by Dre and Snoop Dogg, The Way I Am by Eminem, or a more syncopated one, I'm Not Afraid by Jill Scott. The elements I identify as stylistically important here are, first and foremost, repetition. Very little to no variation at all. Aside from that, there's a heavy focus on kick, snare, hi-hat grooves, so no ride cymbals and no tom fills. Kick drum is usually on beat 1. There's a wide use of syncopation on the kick drum. There's a very strong backbeat feel, and the drum sounds, acoustic or electronic, 808 or some drum machine, are consistent, short, and tight. The repetition factor and the lack of variation within the song in this genre are key. This spotlights the vocals, which are the main focus for this genre. A short side note, the songwriting process varies between creators. Some work horizontally, which means they'll write the whole song over some beat or maybe a guitar or something, and once they have the whole form, they'll start going into each section and detailing the arrangement afterwards. And some work vertically, which means they'll write a verse, for example, they'll do the whole arrangement or just maybe set the vision for it, and then once they're done with that, they'll go to the next section. In both cases, these groove elements can be a great place to start with. And in many cases, these grooves might end up being the right choice, or very, very close to it. These elements are partially what makes these genres sound the way they are. And remembering the aesthetic profile each genre has will help your groove to sound appropriate for the style you're trying to achieve. That being said, these rules are definitely not a must. A jazz groove can be heavy. A rock groove can be in 5/4, for example, and if you listen to the Game Theory album by The Roots, you'll hear many beat variations and even odd time signatures in a hip-hop environment. So don't view these as hard instructions, but more of a recommended guideline that you can just choose to ignore. Anyway, in the next tutorial, I'll discuss some more considerations you should think about when creating more grooves. Let's do it.